With it taking so many resources to power up a Pokemon in Pokemon Go, investing in the correct Pokemon is very important. So in this video, I will be going through the best Pokemon of each type for raid attacking, and some budget options that will be generally easier to obtain and power up. So starting with the Bug type, which is strong against Psychic, Dark, and Grass types. This is one of the weaker types in the game, because there are stronger types that can do its job better. However, when something has a double weakness to Bug, like Hooper Unbound for example, the best Bug types can be very useful. Although I wouldn't really consider a Bug type raid team to be a priority for your resources, but there are still some strong Bug type attackers that are worth powering up. So starting with the best Bug type attacker, we have Mega Heracross with Struggle Bug and Mega Horn. Then we have Mega Pinsir with Fury Cutter and X Scissor, followed by Mega Scizor with Fury Cutter and X Scissor, Pheromosa with Bug Bite and Bug Buzz, Mega Beedrill with Bug Bite and X Scissor, Volcarona with Bug Bite and Bug Buzz, Shadow Scizor with Fury Cutter and X Scissor, and Shadow Pinsir also with Fury Cutter and X Scissor. And for budget options, I would recommend Mega Beedrill. It is the 5th best overall Bug type attacker, and Weedle is generally a common spawn. Not only that, but Mega Energy for Mega Beedrill is the easiest to get in the game. So it only requires 100 Mega Energy to Mega Evolve a Beedrill for the first time. And you can get this amount of Mega Energy from the Mega Discovery special research that all trainers receive when they get to level 20. This means you don't need to wait for it to come to raids to get energy for it. You can also rarely get Mega Beedrill energy from spinning gyms, so you might even accumulate some of it without even noticing. And also its best moveset doesn't have any legacy moves, so that makes it even more accessible. Another good option is Vikavolt, which is the 12th best Bug type attacker, and it doesn't require any raiding or legacy moves to get it. I would also suggest Yanmega, which is the 14th best Bug type attacker. Yanma again is a fairly common spawn and no legacy moves are required for it. However, Yanma does need a Sinnoh Stone to evolve into Yanmega, so it's worth keeping that in mind. And lastly, I would recommend Scizor and Pinsir, which are very similar, being the 17th and 18th best Bug type attackers overall. Scizor, however, does need a Sinnoh Stone, and Scyther and Pinsir are both a bit rarer in the wild than the previous Pokemon I've mentioned. So moving on to the Dark type, which is strong against Psychic and Ghost types. Now, despite Ghost types also being strong against both of these types, Dark types are often the better options because they resist Psychic and Ghost type attacks. And also there are some Dark types like Mega Tyranitar for example that are really strong options. And that brings me to the best Dark type attackers, starting with Mega Tyranitar with Bite and Brutal Swing. Then we have Shadow Tyranitar with the same moveset, Mega Houndoom with Snarl and Foul Play, Tyranitar with Bite and Brutal Swing, Hydreigon with the same moveset, Shadow Weavile with Snarl and Foul Play, Mega Gyarados with Bite and Crunch, and Darkrai with Snarl and Dark Pulse. And for the budget options, I would recommend the 4th best Dark type attacker, which is Tyranitar. Even though Larvitar is pretty rare, it has had 2 community days, and it's been available for a long time in the game, so it's pretty likely that you have some now. However, if you are a newer player and you don't have access to Tyranitar, then I would recommend the 5th best Dark type attacker, Hydreigon. The main downside with Hydreigon though is that it does want legacy move Brutal Swing to be at its best. Other than these, I would recommend Incineroar, which is the 14th best Dark type attacker, and Litten is a fairly common spawn and it has had a community day, so you might have some of these. For the Dragon type, which is super effective against Dragon types only, but despite this it is one of the strongest types in the game. There are many Dragon type legendary raid bosses, and so Dragon is a priority when it comes to building a raid team. Some do believe Fairy and Ice to be better options when it comes to taking down Dragon type Pokemon in raids, because they don't take super effective damage from Dragon type attacks like dragons do themselves. However, as raids are timed, if you do have limited people to do the raid, it's very important to get as much damage in as quickly as you possibly can. And most of the time, Dragon types offer more damage per second than Ice and Fairy, so it is the reason that I consider the Dragon type to be very important. And the best raid attackers amongst the Dragon types are Mega Rayquaza at the top with Dragon Tail and Breaking Swipe. This Pokemon is well worth investing in because it is one of the best in the game. It also doubles up as the best flying type attacker as well, so it's a really decent investment. Then we have Mega Garchomp with Dragon Tail and Outrage, Mega Salamence with Dragon Tail and Draco Meteor, Shadow Palkia with Dragon Tail and Draco Meteor, Palkia in its origin form with Dragon Tail and Spatial Rend. We then have Shadow Salamence with Dragon Tail and Draco Meteor, Black Kyurem with Dragon Tail and Outrage, and Shadow Garchomp with the same moveset. For the budget options, I would recommend Haxorus, with Axew having had a community day before, and it has been available for a while now. It is probably the best budget option, being that it is the 13th best Dragon type attacker overall. However, it is worth keeping in mind that it does want legacy move Breaking Swipe to be at its best, which will require an elite charge TM to get, unless you manage to evolve into Haxorus during its community day. Other than Haxorus, Salamence is a good option because Bagon has had 2 community days in the past, so you might have some decent amount of candy for it. Also doesn't require any legacy moves, so a pretty budget friendly option. It's also the 17th best dragon type attacker, so not bad at all. I would also suggest Dragonite with Dragon Tail and Draco Meteor, and Garchomp with Dragon Tail and Outrage. Both are Community Day Pokemon and have been available for a long time in Pokemon Go. And Garchomp does also double up as a strong budget ground type attacker as well, although it does want Legacy move Earth Power for this. Next up we have the Electric type, which is super effective against flying and water types. Generally this is a pretty good type because the types that it hits for super effective damage are some of the most common types in the game. So investing in some top Electric type raid attackers is a pretty safe investment. And the best Electric types are competitive or better than other types that are super effective against the same types. So the best Electric type raid attackers are Shadow Raikou with Thundershock and Wild Charge, Zekrom with Charge Beam and Fusion Bolt, Thundurus Therian form with Volt Switch and Wild Bolt Storm, Shadow Electivire with Thundershock Wild Charge, Mega Manectric with Thunderfang and Wild Charge, Xurkitree with Thundershock and Discharge, Shadow Zapdos with the same moveset, and Shadow Magnezone with Volt Switch and Wild Charge. And of the Electric types, I would say the best budget option would be Electivire. It's the 13th best Electric type attacker, Electabuzz has had a Community Day in the past, and Elekid has had a Hatch Day. So there is a good chance you do have some high IV Pokemon in this evolution line, or at least a good amount of candy for it to power it up. Again, it will require a Sinnoh Stone to go from Electabuzz to Electivire, so keep that in mind. I would also recommend Magnezone, which is the 16th best Electric type attacker. However, again, it is worth noting it does need a Sinnoh Stone to evolve, which can sometimes be quite difficult to come by. You could also use a Luxray, which is the 20th best Electric type attacker, and Vikavolt, which is the 23rd best Electric type attacker. And as I mentioned before, this Pokemon does also double up as a decent budget bug type as well. Moving on to the Fairy type, which is strong against Dragon, Fighting, and Dark types. This type isn't really much of a priority to build a team for because it does have lower DPS than a lot of its rival types. However, it does have some unique resistances, meaning it can definitely see some use. The best Fairy type raid attackers are Mega Gardevoir with Charm, Dazzling Gleam, Shadow Gardevoir with the same moveset, Enamorus in its incarnate form with Fairy Wind and Dazzling Gleam, Xerneas with Geomancy and Moonblast, Shadow Granbull with Charm and Play Rough, Togekiss with Charm and Dazzling Gleam, Gardevoir with the same moveset, and Hatterene again with the same moveset. For the best budget options, I would recommend Togekiss because it is the 6th best Fairy type attacker and generally a pretty accessible Pokemon, with Togetic having had a Community Day before and Togepi being available in eggs for a while. A close second best would be Gardevoir, which is the 7th best Fairy type attacker. Ralts is a fairly common spawn and it has had 2 Community Days in the past, so it is likely you've managed to accumulate some high IV Ralts and some candy to go with it. Hatterene is also not a bad option. It's the 8th best Fairy type attacker. It hasn't been in the game for long, however, so it is possible you won't have seen it much in the wild yet. And finally, I would recommend Sylveon, which is the 9th best Fairy type attacker, and Primarina, which is the 10th best. Both of these have had Community Days and are fairly common spawns. Primarina also doubles up as a decent water type attacker as well. Next we have the Fighting type, which is strong against Normal, Rock, Steel, Ice, and Dark types. So it is a really useful type that offers a lot of DPS and it can deal super effective damage to a range of types. This is a type I would definitely recommend building a raid team of. And the best of this type for raid attacking are Mega Lucario with Force Palm and Aura Sphere, Mega Heracross with Counter Close Combat. This Pokemon also doubles up as the best bug type attacker, so definitely a good one to invest in. We also have Mega Blaziken with Counter and Focus Blast, Terrakion with Double Kick and Sacred Sword, Shadow Conkeldurr with Counter Dynamic Punch, Lucario with Force Palm and Aura Sphere, Keldeo with Low Kick and Sacred Sword, and Shadow Machamp with Counter and Dynamic Punch. And for the budget options, even though some people might argue it's not really much of a budget Pokemon, and really it's not the most budget Pokemon on this list, but I would recommend Lucario as the best choice in terms of its damage. This is because it is the 6th best overall Fighting type attacker, and Riolu has been featured in many events as a boosted egg hatch, and Lucario itself has appeared in the wild for events previously. So if you have been playing for a while, you will most likely have some of this Pokemon, but for newer players, I could definitely see this Pokemon being a bit harder to obtain. So other than Lucario, a more budget-friendly Pokemon I would recommend is Conkeldurr. This is the 14th best Fighting type attacker, and Timburr has had a Community Day, so it has been a fairly accessible Pokemon in the past. But even more budget-friendly than that would be Machamp. It's the 19th best Fighting type attacker, and Machop is a common spawn and it has been featured in a number of events, so it is possibly the best place to start when it comes to making a Fighting type raid team. And that brings us to the Fire type, which is strong against Grass, Ice, Steel, and Bug. This is a really strong type, being one of the best in terms of damage. However, it isn't used as often as some other types, but it is still a good idea to build a Fire type raid team. The best Fire type raid attackers are Mega Charizard Y with Fire Spin and Blast Burn, Mega Blaziken Blaziken with the same moveset, Shadow Heatran with Fire Spin and Magma Storm, Reshiram with Fire Fang and Fusion Flare, Mega Charizard X with Fire Spin and Blast Burn, Shadow Blaziken with the same moveset, Shadow Darmanitan with Fire Fang and Overheat, and Shadow Moltres with Fire Spin and Overheat. And as far as budget fire type raid attackers, I would recommend Darmanitan, which is the 25th best fire type attacker. I would also recommend Blaziken, which is the 26th best, and Delphox, Chandelure and Emboar are also some good budget options. And all of these budget options have had community days apart from Darmanitan. Next up we have the flying type, which is strong against fighting, grass and bug types. As a whole, this type isn't really that special, but it does contain the most overpowered Pokemon in the game, being Mega Rayquaza with Dragon Ascent. This Pokemon and move combination are stronger than anything else in the game, so well worth investing in over pretty much anything else, especially as it doesn't actually need to be doing super effective damage to beat its competition most of the time. So the best flying type raid attackers are Mega Rayquaza with Air Slash and Dragon Ascent. We also have regular Rayquaza with Air Slash and Dragon Ascent, Shadow Moltres with Wing Attack and Sky Attack, Shadow Staraptor with Gust and Fly, Yveltal with Gust and Oblivion Wing, Mega Pidgeot with Gust Brave Bird, Shadow Honchkrow with Peck and Sky Attack, and Moltres with Wing Attack and Sky Attack. And for budget options, I would recommend Mega Pidgeot, which is the 6th best flying type attacker, and Pidgey has been a common spawn for a long time, and it does only require 100 Mega Energy to Mega Evolve for the first time, so it is one of the cheapest Mega evolutions. Staraptor would also be a good option with it being the 9th best and pretty accessible. Braviary and Honchkrow would also be good options, being the 12th and 14th best flying type attackers respectively. Moving on, we have the Ghost type, which is super effective against Psychic and Ghost types. The top ghost types are very powerful and will often be picked even if they have a weakness to the opposing type. However, they do have some strong competition in the dark types. But what are the best ghost types? Starting at the top, we have the very powerful Dawnwing's Necrozma with Shadow Claw and Moongeist Beam. If there is any ghost Pokemon to prioritize getting and powering up, it would be this one, because even when it's not got a type advantage, it's still very strong. And second only to Dawnwing's Necrozma is Mega Gengar with Lick and Shadow Ball, and again this Pokemon is very strong and I would recommend having at least one maxed out if you can. It's also a very strong poison type attacker despite not having a poison type fast attack. Next we have Shadow Chandelure with Hex and Shadow Ball, Mega Banette with Shadow Claw and Shadow Ball, Shadow Gengar with Lick and Shadow Ball, Giratina Origin with Shadow Claw and Shadow Force, Blacephalon with Astonish and Shadow Ball, and Dragapult with Astonish and Shadow Ball. And for budget options, I would recommend Chandelure, which has had a community day, and Litwick is usually a pretty common spawn around Halloween, and it's the 10th best ghost type attacker overall. Gengar is also a great option, with Ghastly being a community day Pokemon and a very common spawn in general. It is also the 11th best ghost type attacker. These two are really the best budget options, and I would suggest making a team built of these if you haven't got anything better. For the grass type, which is strong against water, ground and rock, it is a good type in the fact that it does have important coverage against these types, but most grass types apart from a few at the top are generally weaker than other type options. The best grass type attackers are Mega Sceptile with Bullet Punch and Frenzy Plant, Mega Venusaur with Vine Whip and Frenzy Plant, Kartana with Razor Leaf and Leaf Blade, Zarude with Vine Whip and Power Whip. You can also use this Pokemon as a decent dark type attacker as well, so it's worth powering up if you've got one. However though, it is mythical and it doesn't appear in raids, so it's not easy to get candy for. Next up we have Shaymin Skyform with Magical Leaf and Grass Knot, Shadow Tangrowth with Vine Whip and Power Whip, Shadow Venusaur with Vine Whip and Frenzy Plant, and Shadow Sceptile with Bullet Seed and Frenzy Plant. And the best budget options are Rillaboom. This Pokemon has been very accessible recently, and Grookey is often featured in max battles too, so you can get a hold of it that way. And being a max Pokemon, you do also have the opportunity to leave it at power spots to passively gain candy as well. And Rillaboom is the 10th best grass type attacker overall. Meowscarada will also be a good option, with it just having had a community day recently, and it is the 12th best grass type attacker. Chestnut is another good option, being a Pokemon that has had a community day, and it is the 13th best grass type attacker. It's worth noting though that it does want legacy move Frenzy Plant to be at its best, so maybe you will be better off going with Roserade, which is the 15th best grass type attacker, and it doesn't need any legacy moves. It also doubles up as a strong poison type attacker as well, so it's decent value. We also have Decidueye and Tangrowth as options, being the 17th and 18th best grass type attackers respectively. Next up we have the ground type, which is strong against electric, rock, fire, steel and poison types, so it can hit a lot of types for super effective damage. Some of the top ground type attackers do comparatively a lot of damage, so it is very competitive with its rival types, and ground is the only type type that can hit electric types for super effective damage, so it does have an advantage of that niche. And the best ground type raid attackers are Primal Groudon with Mudshot and Precipice Blades, and again this is one of those Pokemon that should be an overall target to have maxed out because it is one of the best Pokemon in the game. We also have Mega Garchomp with Mudshot and Earth Power, Shadow Groudon with Mudshot and Precipice Blades, Landorus in its Therian form with Mudshot and Sandsear Storm, Shadow Garchomp with Mudshot and Earth Power, Shadow Excadrill with Mudslap and Scorching Sands. This Pokemon does also double up as a decent Steel type attacker. We also have Shadow Rhyperior with Mudslip and Earthquake, and Groudon with Mudshot and Precipice Blades. And for some budget options, I would recommend Garchomp, which is the 11th best ground type attacker, and Gible has had a community day and it will probably get a community day classic soon. It does however want legacy move Earth Power to be at its best, so the next best option would be Rhyperior, which doesn't need any legacy moves. And likewise, Excadrill is another great option that requires no legacy moves and it is the 16th best overall. I would also recommend Mamoswine as well, which is the 18th best ground type attacker and it doubles up as a strong ice type attacker. And speaking of which, next up we do have the ice type, which is strong against dragon, flying, grass and ground types. This type is not always the best pick for the situation, but it is very useful for those raid bosses that are 2 times weak to ice. It is also worth noting that it's not the easiest type to build a team for, because the good ice types are pretty rare outside of winter events and winter seasonal spawns. But I would recommend having some powered up ice types for the more niche use. The best ice type raid attackers are Shadow Mamoswine with Powder Snow and Avalanche, Shadow Weavile with Ice Shard and Avalanche, Baxcalibur with Ice Fang and Avalanche, Galarian Darmanitan with the same moveset, Mega Abomasnow with Powder Snow and Weather Ball Ice, Mamoswine with Powder Snow and Avalanche, Mega Glalie with Frost Breath and Avalanche, and Shadow Articuno with Frost Breath and Triple Axle. And just to note, when Black and White QRM are released with their moves Freeze Shock and Ice Burn, they will most likely be the new best ice type raid attackers. And as far as budget options go, I would recommend Mamoswine, which is the 6th best ice type attacker, and Swinub has been pretty accessible with it being featured in quite a few events. It does however require a Sinnoh Stone to evolve Piloswine into Mamoswine. Glaceon is a good budget option as well, because Eevee is a common spawn and it has had 2 community days in the past. The only obstacle here really is that Eevee does need to be near an active Glacial Lure module to be able to evolve into Glaceon. But other than buying the Glacial Lure module from the in-game shop, you can get it for placing highly in showcases and sometimes from special research. And if you go to a highly populated area during community day, you might also see some of these Glacial Lure modules active, because lure modules do last for 3 hours on community day, so people tend to use them more often on those days to get more value out of them. Cetitan and Weavile are also good budget options, and they are the 10th and 11th best ice type attackers respectively. I would also suggest Galarian Darmanitan, which is the 4th best ice type attacker, but it's not as accessible as the previous options I mentioned, because most of the time it is locked to 7km eggs only. Moving on, we do have the normal type, which doesn't deal super effective damage to any other type, so therefore it's not really usable for raid attacking, so not really worth building a team of. But if you did want to know out of curiosity what are the best normal type raid attackers, they are Shadow Regigigas with Hidden Power and Giga Impact, regular Regigigas with the same moveset, Shadow Porygon Z with Lock On and Hyper Beam, Mega Lopunny with Pound and Hyper Beam, Meloetta in its Aria form with Quick Attack and Hyper Beam, Xerneas with Tackle and Giga Impact, Porygon Z with Lock On and Hyper Beam, and Shadow Ursaluna with Tackle and Swift. We do then have the Poison type, which is strong against Grass and Fairy types. Unfortunately, this is one of the worst types in the game for raid attacking, because they generally aren't as good as their rival types. So I would set this one as a low priority for building a raid team of. But if you did want to make a raid team or have a couple as backup, the best Poison type raid attackers are Mega Beedrill with Poison Jab and Sludge Bomb, Nihilego with the same moveset, Naganadel with the same moveset, Shadow Toxicroak and Roserade with the same moveset, Shadow Alolan Muck with Poison Jab and Gunk Shot, Shadow Muck with the same moveset, and Shadow Scolipede with Poison Jab and Sludge Bomb. I do also want to mention here Mega Gengar as well, which is a great poison type attacker, but it doesn't have access to a poison type fast attack, so it won't deal as much super effective damage. However, it does still rank at the top or very high on a lot of lists for the best poison type raid attacker. And for the budget options, I would recommend Roserade, which is the 5th best poison type attacker overall, and also Overquill and Toxicroak are good options as well. And for the psychic type, which is super effective against fighting and poison types, this type has got some very strong high damage Pokemon. However, it is only strong against 2 types, so it is a little bit limited. I would still focus on building a team for the psychic type though, because when its time comes, it is very strong. The best psychic type raid attackers are Shadow Mewtwo with Psycho Cut and Psystrike. This Pokemon is particularly strong, and it will most likely only be dethroned by Mega Mewtwo X and Y whenever they get released. We also have Mega Alakazam with Confusion and Psychic, Mega Latios with Zen Headbutt and Psychic, Mewtwo with Psycho Cut and Psystrike, Mega Gallade with Confusion and Psychic, Mega Gardevoir with the same moveset, Shadow Latios with Zen Headbutt and Psychic, and Hooper Unbound with Confusion and Psychic. And as far as budget options go, I would recommend Metagross because Beldum has had 2 community days and it has been fairly accessible in the past. Metagross is the 20th best Psychic type attacker, but it will get access to a Mega form in the future, so powering up a high IV one will pay off. It does also double up as one of the best Steel type attackers as well, and it's really useful for max battles at the moment, so generally a really good value Pokemon to invest in. I would also recommend Espeon, with Eevee being very accessible like I mentioned before with Glaceon. It is worth noting though that it is a bit time consuming to evolve Eevee into Espeon because you do need to walk 10 km with it as your buddy and then evolve it in the daytime. And if you haven't used the Eevee name trick yet, you could set Eevee's nickname to Sakura and then evolve it to get Espeon instantly. This however will only work once, and I would recommend saving the name trick for the level 42 requirements, which do require you to evolve Eevee into each of its evolutions. Alakazam is also a good budget option as well, and it's the 23rd best Psychic type. The next type I want to go through is the Rock type, which is strong against Flying, Fire, Ice and Bug types. This type has a lot of powerful Pokemon and some really good coverage against a lot of pretty common types, and it's especially useful against all of the Flying type legendary Pokemon. And the best Rock type raid attackers are Shadow Rhyperior with Smackdown and Rock Wrecker, Mega Tyranitar with Smackdown and Stone Edge. This also doubles up as the best Dark type attacker. We also have Mega Diancie with Rock Throw and Rock Slide, Shadow Rampardos with Smackdown and Rock Slide, Shadow Gigalith with Smackdown and Meteor Beam, Mega Aerodactyl with Rock Throw and Rock Slide, Shadow Tyranitar with Smackdown and Stone Edge, and Rhyperior with Smackdown and Rock Wrecker. And for budget options, I would recommend Rhyperior, which is the 8th best Rock type attacker. Rhyhorn has been a pretty common spawn in the past, but it is the Community Day legacy move that makes it a little bit less accessible as a Rock type attacker. So as a good alternative, I would recommend Rampardos because it is the 9th best Rock type attacker, so very close to Rhyperior, but it doesn't need any legacy moves. I would also recommend Tyrantrum, Gigalith and Tyranitar, which are the 11th, 13th and 14th best Rock type attackers respectively. Next we have the Steel type, which is strong against Rock, Ice and Fairy types. This type isn't called on for that often, and in general its rival types will be picked over it apart from a couple of the top Steel type attackers which do remain very competitive. It shouldn't be a super high priority for building a Steel type raid attacking team, but a few of the best Steel type attackers are definitely worth investing in. So at the top we have Duskmane Necrozma with Metal Claw and Sunsteel Strike, and this one in particular is super strong compared to the rest and well worth investing in general. We then have Shadow Metagross with Bullet Punch and Meteor Mash, regular Metagross with the same moveset, Shadow Excadrill with Metal Claw and Iron Head, Dialga with the same moveset, Origin Form Dialga again with the same moveset, Mega Aggron with Iron Tail Heavy Slam, and Mega Lucario with Bullet Punch and Flash Cannon. It is also worth noting that with Shadow Palkia coming out this season, it's very likely that Shadow Dialga will come next season, and that will be up there with some of the best Steel type attackers. For budget options, again, Metagross is a really good option because it is one of the best Steel type attackers, ranked 3rd best, and it has had 2 community days in the past, so very likely you have resources for it. I would also recommend Excadrill, which does double up as a decent ground type attacker. And lastly, we do have the Water type, which is strong against Fire, Ground and Rock types. The best Pokemon of this type are very competitive with its rival types, so it generally isn't a bad type to invest in and build a raid team for. The best Water type attackers are Primal Kyogre with Waterfall and Origin Pulse. This is one of the best Pokemon in the game, so well worth investing in. We also have Mega Swampert with Water Gun and Hydro Cannon, Shadow Kyogre with Waterfall and Origin Pulse, Mega Blastoise with Water Gun and Hydro Cannon, Mega Gyarados with Waterfall and Hydro Pump, Kyogre with Waterfall Origin Pulse, Shadow Swampert with Water Gun and Hydro Cannon, and Shadow Samurott with Waterfall and Hydro Cannon. And for budget options, I would recommend Primarina, which is the 12th best Water type attacker, and it has had a community day in the past, so it's been pretty accessible. You could also use Greninja, which is the 14th best, and Swampert, which is the 18th best. Greninja and Swampert in particular are pretty accessible because they have had community days, but they do require that community day legacy move. So you could go for Kingler, and Krabby does have a max form now, so you can always leave max Krabby at power spots to get extra candy for it to power it up. And with that said, if you did enjoy this video, then I recommend checking out these videos on the screen now, and I'll catch you in the next one.